Welcome. This is Irene Woods. Today I'm going to knit a pair of men's socks on a bulky knitting machine. This sock begins with knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. I do not have a ribber for this bulky machine, so am making hand-latched ribbing. Bring forward 45 needles, then return every other needle back to position A out of work. Cast on over the remaining 22 needles with waste yarn. I will be knitting the sock at 3 and 1 dot for main tension and 2 and 1 dot for ribbing, and tension 0 for the cast on rows. Thread the carriage and knit approximately 1 inch. I'm hand feeding the waste yarn, but you can thread it through the second yarn guide instead. Pull the needles forward for the next 2 or 3 rows when knitting without the cast-on comb. This prevents drop stitches. Change to main color and knit 3 rows. Leave a long yarn tail for seaming. Bring the alternate needles that were returned to position A back to work. There should now be 45 needles in working position. Set the row counter to 0, 0, 0. Hang weights. I'm using bar weights, but claw weights will also work. Knit to row count 18. Remove the weights. Drop the second stitch from the right edge and ravel it down to the cast on. This section of video is just out of camera range. What I am doing will be visible in a few seconds. Drop the stitch and ravel it down to the waste yarn. Insert the latch tool under the first bar of the main color. Skip over the next 2 bars. Catch the next bar with the latch hook and pull it through the stitch already on the tool. Continue up to the top. Hang the stitch back on the empty needle. Repeat across, dropping and latching up every other stitch. Latching up columns of stitches near the edge is a little more fiddly. Take your time. Be sure to catch every bar. The last column especially takes a little more concentration. Pull down firmly on the fabric to help open up the spaces between the bars. Work slowly and check to be sure you catch every bar. This yarn splits easily. I have to watch carefully that I get all the plies. Turn the stitch dial up to 3 and 1 dot. Hang weights. Do not reset the row counter. Just let it continue to run. The pattern says to knit to row 70, but I want a shorter sock, so I'm going to knit to row count 60. End with the carriage on the right side. Pull the needles left of center 0 out to hold, and set the carriage to hold. Set the row counter to 0, 0, 0 and turn the stitch dial down to 2 and 1 dot. Bring the first needle next to the carriage out to hold and knit 1 row. Repeat from the star 11 more times. This is row 12 and the carriage is on the right. Do not bring a needle out to hold. There should be 10 stitches remaining in work, 6 stitches in hold on the right and 6 additional needles in hold on the left side. I have 11 stitches in work. I forgot to decrease 1 stitch after completing the ribbing, so there are 45 stitches in the sock, not 44. Ideally, I should take it out back to the ribbing and make the decrease, but I'm not going to do it over. Begin increasing back out for the heel turn. Manually knit the first stitch next to the carriage. Push first holding stitch on side opposite the carriage back to upper work position and knit 1 row. Repeat from the double star until all heel stitches are back in work position. Keep the heel section weighted to prevent drop stitches. It also helps to pull down on the point of the heel with the non-knitting hand. This tip is not in the pattern. A small hole often forms between needles one left and one right. Before knitting that last row, you can wrap the first holding needle, or pick up the purl bump, also called the heel of the stitch, from needle 1 right of 0 and hang it on needle 1 left. I'm now going to knit the foot. Turn the stitch dial back to 3 and 1 dot and set the row counter to 0, 0, 0. The pattern says to knit 49 rows. My row gauge is slightly different, and I also want a shorter foot, so we'll knit just 39 rows. End with carriage on the left. Turn the stitch dial down to 2 and 1 dot. Shape the toe the same as for the heel, but decrease until only 6 stitches remain in work. Bring the first needle next to the carriage out to hold position and knit 1 row. Repeat from the star 15 more times. This is a total of 16 rows. This is the turning row for the toe. Manually knit the first holding needle on the carriage side. Push back the first holding needle on the side opposite the carriage to work position and knit 1 row. Repeat from the double star until all stitches are in work. This tip is not in the pattern. End by knitting 1 row to the right. Remove yarn from the carriage and cut, leaving a very long tail. This yarn tail will be used to graft the toe seam and seam the foot. Remove each side of the foot separately on waste yarn. Removing each side separately makes it easier to graft the toe seam. Remove yarn from the carriage and take it across empty to drop the fabric off the bed. Remove weights and yarn clips. This is where I picked up the purl bump or heel of the stitch to pull a little hole together. After this sock is washed, this won't show at all. I'm checking for holes or drop stitches on the heel and toe. Everything looks okay. The pattern says to Kitchener stitch or graft the toe. I'm going to show you how I do this on the machine. You can sew it by hand if you prefer. Hold the sock up to the machine with the knit side facing you and the center of the sock where it will fold on the right side. Pick up the main color stitches. There should be 22, but I forgot to decrease one stitch after the ribbing, so I have 23 stitches. Fold the sock over so knit sides are together. Pick up 22 stitches. Decided to transfer that extra stitch on the left side onto the next needle to the right. There are now 3 main color stitches on that needle. There's a lot of bulk and it will be harder to graft, so I'm pulling out one strip of waste yarn. I thought it might be easier to see the stitching process with some contrast color, so decided to leave the back waste yarn strip. Thread a yarn needle with the long tail on the right side. Pass the needle from back to front towards you through both stitches on the first needle. Move over one needle to the left. Pass the needle from front to back through just the top stitch. Then go back one needle to the right. Pass the needle from front to back through just the back stitch on needle 1. Now pass the needle towards you from back to front through both stitches on needle 2. Move over to needle 3. Pass the needle front to back through the top stitch only. Then pass it front to back through the back stitch on needle 2. Repeat this across. On step 1, pass the needle back to front towards you through both stitches on the needle. On step 2, move one needle to the left. Pass the needle front to back through the top stitch only, then front to back through the back stitch only on the previous needle on the right. That extra bulk from the waste yarn is making it harder to get through the double stitches. You might like to remove it if you try this method. This yarn also tends to split, so I'm trying to be sure I get through the center of the stitches and not through just part of the yarn. I'll finish this off camera, then be back near the end of this graft. There are 3 stitches on the end needle because that's where I put the extra stitch. I have to get the needle through all of them. Remove the sock from the machine. Remove the waste yarn. Pull the fabric firmly. The fabric is stretched sideways on the machine, and this helps to get it into shape. I'm checking for dropped stitches. This isn't a dropped stitch, but I did split the yarn here, and one of the plies didn't get worked in. Now I'm going to seam the sock. The pattern says to whip stitch, taking just the outside loops. I still use that method on standard gauge socks, but I like one of the other flat seams better for bulky ones. There are many versions of these seams. Today it is common to call all of them Bickford seams. We used to call them simply flat seams. I'm using the loop to knot method and will demonstrate how to do it and what it looks like 2 different ways. Thread the yarn needle with the yarn tail from the toe bind off. Hold the sock with the knit sides together. Pass the needle toward you, back to front, through the first loop on the back half of the sock. Then pass the needle towards you through the first knot. When the stitches are tight, and these are, it can be tricky to get the needle through. Now pass the needle away from you through the first loop, then away from you through the first knot. Repeat this sequence up to the heel. Always go through the next loop, then the next knot. First toward yourself, then away from yourself. Let's see what the seam looks like on the knit side. Turn the sock right side out. It's visible, but it's neat and it's flat when worn. There is no lumpy seam allowance like there would be with mattress stitch. Turn the sock purl side out and continue to seam up to the heel. I'm now going to seam from the cast-on edge down to the heel. I prefer to seam this way. It's easier for the seam to get off a few rows than when using mattress stitch, and being able to ease in rows at the heel turn area prevents a bubble of excess fabric at either the top of the ribbing or top of the toe, because there's only half a seam length that can shift. I did not use ravel cord when casting on with waste yarn, so I must clip the first row of waste yarn in order to pull the strip off. Insert the needle tip into the first row of waste yarn and pull out a loop. Clip the loop and pick out a stitch or two from the main color. Grasp the yarn tail on the opposite edge and pull firmly. This will separate the waste yarn from the ribbing. Casting on with this method produces a stretchy edge that resembles the edge you get when using a ribber. I'm going to sew just the ribbing section with modified mattress stitch, sewing through half a stitch from the edge rather than a whole stitch. Thread the yarn needle with the long tail from the cast on. Pass it under the first stitch on the opposite edge and pull up to bring the sides together. Work through the center of the edge stitches, half a stitch in from each edge. Pass the yarn under the first bar on one side. Then pass the needle under the first bar on the opposite edge. Repeat until the end of the ribbing, going under one bar at a time. When the ribbing seam is completed, pass the needle to the purl side and turn the sock purl side out. Begin seaming with the loop to knot method, the same as for the seam on the foot. Sew to the heel. Close the remaining part of the seam. Pass the needle to the inside and turn the sock right side out. These are not really holes. They are where the fabric stretched out at the heel turning rows and are very common. It's better to avoid this happening when knitting the heel short rows by snugging up the yarn to pull out the extra length on the edge stitch. But we frequently don't notice this until we begin sewing up the sock. This is a weak spot in the sock and it will get worse with wear. I'm darning the area to strengthen it, trying to use stitches which look like original stitches. They pull the fabric together. This is not exactly duplicate stitch, but it is similar. Pass the needle back to the inside and turn the sock wrong side out. Work in both yarn ends. Turn the sock right side out. I'm checking the seam for any other problems, but it looks pretty good. Even the darn spot at the heel is okay. Knitting the second sock. Shaping is reversed on this sock. The heel is knitted on the left side and the toe on the right side. This allows the seams on both socks to be on the inner sides of the feet where they are not as visible. A slightly different seam method is also demonstrated. This sock is started the same way as the first one. I casted on 45 stitches with waste yarn and made 18 rows ribbing. The first sock has 60 rows until the start of the heel shaping. This one has 59 rows because the heel is on the left side, not the right side. Tighten the tension one number on the stitch dial before starting to knit the heel section. Bring the first needle next to the carriage out to hold position and knit one row. Repeat from the star 11 more times. This is a total of 12 rows to the center of the heel. The pattern says 10 stitches remain in work position and carriage is on the right. However, I am knitting this sock in reverse to the first one, so the carriage is on the left after the 12th row. I forgot to make a decrease after completing the ribbing on the first sock. I want these socks to match, so omitted the decrease on this one also. This means there are 11 stitches in the center of the heel, not 10 like the pattern says. Do not make a decrease. Manually knit the first holding stitch next to the carriage. Push the first holding needle on the side opposite the carriage back to work position and knit one row. Repeat from the double star until all heel stitches are back in work position. Knit one row. Keep the heel section weighted to prevent dropped stitches. I'm going to pick up the purl bump under needle 1 left of center 0 and place it on needle 1 right to help close up the little hole that can form here. Set the row counter to 000 and turn the stitch dial back up to the main tension. The pattern says to knit to row 49, but I used 39 rows in the first sock, so we'll do that here as well so that the socks match. I'm ready to begin the toe. Turn the stitch dial down 1 number. Bring stitches left of center 0 to hold position and set the carriage to hold. Bring the first needle next to the carriage out to hold position and knit 1 row. Repeat from the star 15 more times. 6 stitches remain in work position. Do not decrease. Manually knit the first holding needle next to the carriage. Push the first holding needle on the side opposite the carriage back to work position and knit 1 row. Repeat from the double star until all toe stitches are back in work position. End with carriage on the left. Cut yarn, leaving a very long tail for grafting and seaming. Remove each side separately on waste yarn. Graft the toe, same as for the first sock. I'm sewing loop to knot again, but this time with the purl sides together or with the knit side facing up as shown. I started sewing with the same yarn used to graft the toe and have sewn to the heel. The seam is flatter than the one on the first sock, even though I have sewn loop to knot on both. It also shows a little more on the knit side, but it is definitely flatter on the purl side. I cast it on with waste yarn and again did not use ravel cord. I'm pulling out a loop of waste yarn so that I can clip it without damaging the ribbing. Pulling out a few stitches on this edge, then tugging firmly on the yarn tail on the other side to release the waste yarn strip. Just like on the first sock, I'm sewing mattress stitch, but seaming half a stitch from each edge rather than a whole stitch. When I come to the end of the ribbing, I change back to sewing loop to knot until I reach the heel. It's a little harder to find the knots and get the needle through them than when using the first seam method. Using the smallest needle that has an eye large enough for the yarn to go through helps. I don't use a normal bulky yarn needle for this seam. Both edges of the sock curl to the purl side. I have to roll them out with my fingers before taking every stitch. Same as for the first sock, I'm making a few darning stitches right at the turn of the heel to strengthen that area. Pass the needle to the inside to take the yarn to the purl side. Remove the needle and thread it with the other yarn tail. Take this yarn tail to the inside as well. Turn the sock inside out. Work in the yarn ends. This is the purl side of the seam. It is flatter than the seam on the first sock. Turn the sock right side out. This is the knit side of the seam. It is flatter, but is more visible than the seam on the first sock. Both seams are good. I prefer method 1 for sweaters or other garments where the seam is not so obvious, and method 2 where a flatter seam is more important. It was stretched sideways while on the machine, so pulling the fabric lengthwise, especially on heel and toe, helps bring it into correct shape. These are the finished socks immediately after sewing. They have not been washed or blocked by any method. While blocking will smooth out the bumps at heel and toe a little, they really look very good right now. This pattern can also be used on mid-gauge machines. Many yarns of this weight will knit successfully, usually on tension 7 to 8. For a mid-gauge machine, choose a thinner yarn in knitting worsted or number 4 weight. Thicker, stiffer Aran yarns do not knit well on mid-gauge machines. This free pattern, called Men's Bulky Socks, can be found on the Clearwater Knits website. A link is in the notes below. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and share the link with your friends.